Psychopath or monster, inside the criminal mind of the park maniac serial killer. There are events that do not simply happen. They seep into the air of a city, stain memory, and remain breathing inside its silence even decades later. In São Paulo, during the late 1990s, there was a time when something dark moved unnoticed among crowded streets and ordinary days. Women walked with dreams in their hands, believing the world had space for them, believing the future was waiting. They had no reason to fear the smile of a man who spoke softly and promised opportunities. They had no reason to imagine that trust itself could become the trap. This story is not about a monster hiding in shadows. It is about a man who learned to blend so perfectly with hope that he used it as a weapon. Francisco de Assis Pereira. On paper, the name means nothing, just another name in a city of millions. But in the air, in whispered stories, in the tightening of a mother's hand on her daughter's wrist, the name became a warning. He approached his victims not with violence at first, but with attention, validation, the illusion of being seen. He knew how to speak in a way that lowered defenses. His promise was always simple. You were special, you were chosen, you were about to be something. And in a city where thousands of young women dreamed of being models, actresses, figures admired and recognized, his words felt like an open door. Many followed him willingly, not because they were naive, but because they believed in the beauty of opportunity. That is what makes this horror real. It wasn't fear that led them into danger, it was hope. The Parque do Estado was supposed to be a place of fresh air, a place to breathe away from the weight of buildings and engines. But every predator needs a territory, a place where the world cannot hear the moment when trust breaks and reality disappears behind the trees. There, under the cover of branches and dirt paths, a new kind of silence was forming. A silence that would take years for the city to understand. When the news began to circulate, it did not start with headlines. It started with whispers. A missing girl, then another, and another. Families searching. Police trying to connect dots that didn't want to connect. Rumors spreading through neighborhoods, schools, workplaces. Women stopped walking alone. Friends refused to separate. Every shadow felt heavier. Every stranger felt closer. But the most terrifying part was not how he took lives. It was how he convinced them to follow him without force. The horror of this story is not sharp or sudden. It is slow. It is patient. It is a hand extended with a smile that does not look dangerous until it is too late. This is not just a crime story. It is a wound in the memory of a city, a scar that remains even now. And the question that rises again, right now, is not about the past. It is about time. Time that moves forward no matter what has been done. Time that opens doors, even for those who tore so many others shut. Francisco de Assis Pereira has been in prison for more than 2 decades. By law, by the calendar, by the system that holds him, the year of his release approaches. 2028 is no longer distant. What does it mean when a nightmare is given the chance to wake up again? And what does a society do when the darkness it remembers returns to stand in the daylight, the city that did not know it was being hunted? São Paulo in the late 1990s was a city that never paused. A place of buses packed before sunrise, of neon lights flickering above sidewalks that never truly emptied, of voices overlapping in a constant rush. Life moved quickly, and no one believed they were being watched. There was too much to do, too much to reach for. The city was young, restless, and hungry. Every street seemed to offer a chance. Every subway ride held a possibility. Every conversation opened a new door. People were rushing toward futures they hadn't yet defined. Dreams were common. Hope was cheap. Trust came easily when wrapped in the right tone of voice. This was a city where independence was a kind of pride. Women walked alone to work. Students crossed town for classes. Girls left home with clipped portfolios and big plans, searching for the kind of opportunity that could change everything. No one imagined that danger might not roar or chase or stalk in the obvious ways. Danger here did not wear darkness on its face. It walked softly. It smiled. It spoke gently. There were missing person posters, yes, a few scattered articles, but São Paulo was too large, too busy, too loud. The disappearances were softened by the scale of the city. When a person vanished, the city did not stop. It absorbed the silence and kept moving. A name lost in a crowd of millions becomes a whisper barely heard. It takes time for a pattern to surface, time for fear to gather shape. At night, the city glowed, a glow that suggested safety, even when none existed. People believed that being surrounded by others meant being protected. Light meant visibility. Visibility meant security, but no one notices what they don't expect to see. A predator hiding in plain sight is more invisible than one hiding in shadow. The Parque do Estado stood like a lung of green pressed against concrete. Families picnicked there. Runners traced familiar paths. Young women walked there believing the world was open to them. You could hear children playing. The air smelled of grass, humidity and soil warming under the sun. There was nothing threatening about a place like that. It held no obvious warning. And yet slowly, the atmosphere was changing. A feeling started to settle into the background of the city, faint as a memory that tries to surface but doesn't quite break through. A tension you couldn't name, a silence that didn't make sense. Something was wrong, but not wrong enough to acknowledge aloud. People simply moved faster, looked down more often, held keys tighter between fingers when walking alone at night. Instinct remembers before reason does. The city did not know it was being hunted because the hunter did not announce himself. He did not wait behind trees or step out from alleys with a weapon drawn. He promised dreams, not danger. He offered attention, not threat. He used the exact thing everyone was chasing against them: opportunity. Fear had not arrived yet, not in full. It was still forming, like a fog beginning at the edge of vision. But soon the city would learn. Soon those whispers would gather enough weight to become stories. Stories would become warnings. Warnings would become terror. And the name that once sounded ordinary would become something else entirely. But here in this moment, the city was still breathing calmly. The streets were still loud. The parks were still open. Women still accepted compliments without suspicion. Doors still opened freely. Because no one imagines the danger that comes wrapped in warmth, and no one believes that a nightmare can have a human face. The man before the name. Before the headlines, before the city spoke his name in a lowered voice, before mothers warned daughters not to trust a friendly smile, Francisco de Assis Pereira was simply another face in the crowd. That is the part that unsettles people the most. There was nothing extraordinary in his appearance. No darkness visible at first glance. He was the kind of man you could stand next to on a bus without remembering afterward. Average height, soft-spoken, a certain gentleness in his gestures that made him seem harmless, forgettable. And it is precisely the forgettable ones who can move through the world without resistance. He grew up in a life that did not announce violence. No one looked at him and saw a predator forming. He worked small jobs. He tried to fit into the patterns others lived by. People who knew him described him as calm, even polite. He had a way of lowering his voice when speaking to women, as if he were listening more than talking. That made him seem trustworthy, like someone who saw them when so many others overlooked their existence. In a city of millions, being noticed can feel like a gift. But underneath this quiet presence was something else. A fracture that did not show until it was too late. Not a dramatic break, not madness screaming from the surface. It was subtle, the kind that hides inside a person like a locked room no one else has ever entered. Something shaped him slowly, a growing distance between his emotions and his actions. He learned how to mimic warmth without feeling it, how to imitate empathy without understanding it. He learned that if he mirrored someone's dreams back to them, they would trust him without question. He did not see women the way others did, not as equals, nor as people living full and separate lives. To him, they were possibilities, images, objects of admiration that could be controlled and possessed. His loneliness did not make him withdraw, it made him study, observe, practice the art of appearing safe. When he spoke about modeling agencies, photography, opportunities, his tone carried confidence without arrogance. He knew how to approach gently, ask questions, and create the illusion of connection. He had done it enough times that it became natural. There was no hesitation in him when he played the role of the supportive stranger. The mask fit too well. And yet, even with the mask, he was not invisible to everyone. Some noticed something they could not define, a hesitation in his smile, a look that lingered a little too long, a quiet that felt unnatural rather than shy. People often ignore their instincts because they cannot explain them, but instincts rarely lie. The danger in him was not loud. It existed in the spaces between his expressions, in the silence behind his eyes, in the way he watched rather than engaged. A predator fully aware of his environment, waiting for the moment when vulnerability opened itself. To the world, Francisco was someone trying to find his place. To himself, he was already something else, something shaped by desire, control, and a need to dominate the spaces where trust lived. His crimes did not begin suddenly. They were built quietly, step by small step, thought by repeated thought. They formed like a shadow growing behind him, unnoticed until the day it stood taller than the man himself. The most frightening truth is this: he did not look like evil. He did not speak like evil. He did not act like evil until the moment came when the mask could be removed. That is why the city did not see him. That is why the victims did not run. The danger was disguised as attention. The weapon was belief. He walked among people who never imagined that a nightmare could be polite. He did not become a monster in the dark. He became one in daylight, in crowded spaces, while the world kept moving around him. And when the mask finally did fall, it was already too late for those who trusted him. They saw him clearly only at the end, and by then there was no path back. The mask of social seduction. He did not need force to approach. He did not need threats, intimidation, or raised voices. His power came from something far quieter, far more unsettling. Francisco understood how to become exactly what someone wanted to see. He built his approach like a performance, rehearsed not in front of mirrors, but in the reactions of the people around him. He learned what made others relax. He learned what made them open up. He learned how to appear harmless. He introduced himself with confidence, but not the kind that pushes forward. His confidence was understated, almost fragile, the kind that made people feel protective toward him. He positioned himself as someone with access to a dream, but not as someone above those he offered it to. He made it seem like he was giving an opportunity, not selling one. That distinction is what made the manipulation work. It never felt like persuasion. It felt like coincidence, destiny, luck. The modeling industry in São Paulo carried a shine that was hard to resist. To be seen, to be chosen, to be noticed. Hundreds of agencies, studios, scouts, photographers. It was a city full of ambition. And ambition, when touched, warms quickly. When he approached young women, he did not start with compliments about beauty. That would be too direct, too common. Instead, he spoke about potential, a word heavier than any compliment. Potential is a mirror that reflects back hope, and hope makes people lean forward to listen. He used body language with precision. He stood close enough to suggest interest, but not so close as to intrude. He kept his hands still, his gestures calm, his eyes steady. He smiled with restraint, every detail designed to communicate one message: I am safe. You can trust me. His conversations were built to create familiarity. He asked personal questions, but not invasive ones. He remembered details and repeated them later to create a sense of connection. He validated insecurities subtly, turning them into reasons to keep talking. When someone feels understood, they lower walls, and once walls lower, you do not need to push. You guide. He never hurried. He knew patience was his strongest advantage. If someone expressed hesitation, he softened further. If someone questioned him, he laughed gently, as though the doubt itself was an unnecessary worry. He turned reassurance into intimacy. And when someone feels safe with you, you do not need to convince them to follow. They choose it. That is the true horror. No one was dragged. No one was forced into the park. They walked there because they believed in him, because they believed in themselves, because the dream he offered felt real. His words were not lies, not exactly. They were reflections of the world the women wanted to enter. He offered the key to that world. It was only when the gate shut behind them that they realized what the key actually unlocked. Seduction here was not romantic. It was psychological. He seduced trust, not affection. He seduced the belief that everything would be fine. And once that belief had been captured, everything else became easy. The mask did not slip, it did not crack, it did not break. He removed it only when the path back was already gone. And this is where fear becomes something deeper than fear, because it forces a question that lingers in the mind long after the story ends. How many people have we met who were wearing masks we never saw? How many smiles did we trust simply because they were warm? How many dangers walked beside us in daylight? The terror is not in the violence. The terror is in how ordinary the beginning looked, how gentle the deception felt, how invisible the danger was, until the moment it was already closing its hand. The eyes that chose the victims. He did not choose randomly. Predators never do. There is method in selection, even when the world believes the violence is chaotic. Francisco watched before he approached. He observed patterns, details, hesitations that most people would never notice. He was not searching for beauty. Beauty was common. The city was full of beautiful women. What he searched for was something quieter, something that lived between words and expressions. He looked for vulnerability disguised as confidence, a pause before answering, a gaze that lingered just a second too long, searching for approval, a laugh that tried a little harder than necessary, the subtle signs of someone wanting to be seen, wanting to be acknowledged, wanting to be chosen. He learned how to recognize that longing in an instant. It was his entrance. The modeling dream made that search easy. Many young women carried ambition tightly, like something fragile they didn't want to drop. They were in a city that promised so much, but delivered so little. So when someone said you have potential, it didn't just feel flattering, it felt like direction, like proof, like confirmation that the world might open its doors. He looked for those moments. He listened to silence more than words. He identified those who walked slightly behind their friends, those who tried to convince themselves that they belonged, those whose eyes flickered when speaking of the future. A flicker of uncertainty is all a manipulator needs. He did not need to overpower someone physically. He needed their trust to weaken itself. But vulnerability was not his only measure. He chose people who would not be immediately missed in the first hours, someone whose schedule was flexible, someone whose family lived far, someone who could say they were going to a photo shoot, a meeting, an opportunity, and no one would question it. Not because they didn't care, but because it made sense. The lie blended with the life. There was another factor, one even more disturbing. He chose those who smiled back, not out of warmth, but out of politeness, out of social conditioning. Society teaches women to be kind, to not offend, to not appear rude when a stranger approaches with a compliment or request. This politeness became a trap. He used the expectation of gentleness to hide the danger. The world did not prepare them to distrust a soft voice. He understood the rhythm of human behavior. He waited for the perfect moment when someone's guard lowered just enough. A park bench, a bus stop, a shopping center entrance, a train platform, locations where life blurs and attention drifts. He inserted himself into those spaces like a shadow stepping into shape. His gaze did not evaluate appearance, it evaluated submission, the willingness to follow, the difficulty of saying no, the desire to believe in something better. It was not the victims who failed. It was trust that was weaponized against them. This is what makes the story unbearable. The selection was psychological, calculated, calm. There was no rage in the choosing, only intention, cold, deliberate, and rehearsed. In the eyes of the city, it looked like coincidence, random disappearances, names floating in the chaos of a metropolis. But to him, there was nothing random. Every approach had a beginning, a middle, and a quiet, practiced end. The victims were chosen long before they realized they were being approached. And here is the question that disturbs the most. If someone can choose a victim simply by recognizing hope, then how do you defend yourself? Hope is not something people can turn off. It is part of survival itself, and he hunted those who needed to hope the most. The park as a perfect disappearance. The Parque do Estado was not an abandoned place. That is what makes this part of the story so unsettling. It was a public space, full of movement, full of voices, full of everyday life. A place where children played, couples walked, joggers traced familiar loops. Sunlight passed between tall trees. The air carried the smell of damp earth and cut grass. Nothing about it suggested danger. Nothing about it suggested that quiet could be used as a weapon. When people imagine a crime, they picture something hidden. A dark alley, a deserted road, a place where no one goes. But predators do not always need isolation. Sometimes all they need is a moment when the world stops watching. A place that looks safe, feels safe, and therefore does not trigger instinct. The park offered this perfectly. Paths that twisted into deeper shadows, open enough to walk, secluded enough that a single scream could vanish before reaching another human ear. It is terrifying how easily familiar spaces can become traps. Francisco knew the park. He learned its roots, its clearings, its quiet corners, where the trees grew taller and the sound of the city faded into a faint memory. He knew where paths became narrow enough that turning back felt unnatural. He knew where curiosity pulled people forward. He knew the exact points where the light dimmed just enough to feel intimate rather than alarming. He used the environment the way a hunter uses terrain, not with force, but with guidance. He walked slightly ahead, speaking about dreams, about possibilities, about the next step, the next photo, the next chance to be someone more than they were. And the park cooperated. It held space for trust to deepen. It softened suspicion. Nature itself played along. The victims did not realize what was happening because nothing appeared wrong. The world did not look dangerous. There were no alarms, no sudden shifts. The betrayal of safety happened slowly, through distance. A step further from the trail. A turn that didn't feel like a turn. A direction that felt natural because someone confident was leading. And by the time recognition flickered in the mind, the path back no longer looked familiar. There is something horrifying about a place that appears calm after violence occurs. The trees do not remember. The ground does not protest. The wind continues. The park returns to normal, as if nothing happened. A living world that erases evidence simply by existing. Leaves fall, soil absorbs, silence resumes. The people of São Paulo continued to visit the park, jog, picnic, relax. And all the while, something unspeakable lingered beneath the surface of that ordinary peace. The city did not yet understand why so many disappearances began with a conversation and ended with absence. The park became the stage for vanishing, and no one noticed until the pattern formed in hindsight. A map of disappearances overlapping like shadows converging on the same ground. It was the perfect place, not because it was hidden, but because it was visible. Because no one suspects danger in a place meant for rest. Because trust feels natural when the world around you looks gentle. Because the worst horrors are the ones that happen in spaces where we believe we are safe. And when the truth finally surfaced, the park itself remained unchanged. Trails still wound through the trees, sunlight still traced patterns across the dirt. Life continued on the surface, while the memory of those who never walked back out lived only in the fear that followed. A place cannot be guilty, but a place can hold silence, and silence can hide anything. The moment the silence breaks. There is a point in every story where the surface of reality tears. It does not happen suddenly. It is not loud. It begins as a feeling, a tightening in the chest, a flicker of recognition that something is wrong. The brain understands before the body does, but the body reacts first. A pulse that speeds too fast, a breath that comes too shallow, muscles tense without being told. This is the moment when trust collapses. For the victims, the shift was almost imperceptible. A change in tone, a pause in conversation that lasted a fraction too long, a look in his eyes that no longer matched his smile. They realized the world was not what they believed a second before. The path back was already gone. The distance from safety already too large. The voice they had trusted now sounded distant, unfamiliar, cold. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to threaten. The violence was not in the sudden act, but in the moment the mask fell. His face did not change shape, but something in him shifted. His movements lost gentleness. His steps became deliberate, calculated. The conversation ended as if someone had turned off a light. Victims describe this moment as the point where a person stops being human. The silence around them thickened. Sound behaves differently when fear takes hold. Every noise grows sharper, yet the world feels distant, muffled, unreachable. The park that moments before felt open and alive now felt endless and empty. Trees stood like walls. The air grew heavy. Time slowed. This is the point where the mind desperately searches for a logical explanation. It bargains. It negotiates with disbelief. This cannot be happening. I am overreacting. Maybe I misunderstood. Hope fights to stay alive, even when survival demands that it dies. But predators rely on that hesitation. Francisco watched the exact second when fear appeared. He recognized it. He expected it. It was part of his design. He had repeated this moment enough times that it no longer moved him. It was the final step in a pattern he had rehearsed again and again. The look of realization in their eyes did not disturb him. It affirmed him. The silence between him and the world was complete. There was no remorse, no hesitation, only control. The city would later try to understand what happened in those moments. It would search for motive, pathology, reason. But violence of this nature has no logic that fits within the boundaries of ordinary thought. It is not impulse. It is not madness in the cinematic sense. It is the expression of something that learned to separate empathy from action, desire from morality. Once the silence broke, nothing could return to what it had been. The path behind was lost. The future ahead was replaced by something monstrous. And yet, the world around remained calm. No one heard, no one saw, no one suspected. This is the horror that lingers long after the story ends. Not the violence itself, but the realization that violence can occur in complete quiet, in complete calm, in complete daylight, without anyone noticing. The silence that breaks does not echo. It disappears into the air like breath. The world moved on as if nothing had happened. But for those who survived that final moment, something else emerged. A memory that does not fade. a sound that is not sound, a silence that follows them into every room, every night, every dream. This is where the city's innocence ended, not with headlines, not with police reports, but with the quiet collapse of trust in the ordinary, because danger was not outside. It was beside them, walking, speaking, smiling. When the city finally begins to fear, fear does not arrive all at once. It moves slowly, like a shadow stretching across the ground as the sun goes down. In São Paulo, the fear began as murmurs, fragments of stories that did not yet feel connected. A missing girl, a friend who never returned home, a news segment that faded quickly from memory. The city was too big, too fast, too full of tragedies for any single disappearance to stand out. Grief was swallowed by the noise of daily life, but patterns have a way of pushing themselves into awareness. First came the mothers. They noticed before the city did, calls that went unanswered, doors that did not open. A daughter who said she was meeting someone about modeling work and never stepped back into the house again. Mothers spoke to neighbors, neighbors spoke to cousins, cousins spoke to co-workers. The fear spread in whispers, not alarms. Then came the coincidence, a name heard twice, a location repeated. A familiar description of a man who seemed kind, polite, unthreatening. The city did not know his face yet, but it knew the shape of his presence. Women stopped walking alone. Groups began moving closer together. Strangers were no longer just strangers. They were potential stories waiting to repeat. The media was slow at first. Crimes in big cities are plentiful, and not every disappearance becomes headline material. But then, one story gained attention, then another and another. Photos of smiling girls began appearing side by side on screens and posters. Faces once full of life, frozen in still images. The city recognized something it did not want to name. Someone was choosing. Parks, once considered safe spaces, began to feel different. The wind through the trees no longer sounded peaceful. Joggers felt watched. Young women avoided the shaded paths. And still, the city did not have a name to fear, only the silhouette of one, a presence, a threat that breathed but had no face attached to it yet. Police began to connect fragments, different families describing the same hopeful story, the same promise of opportunity, the same charismatic stranger who spoke softly and carried himself with ease. Patterns formed. And when patterns form, fear shifts into something sharper, something real. The city reacted the way living organisms do when threatened. It tightened, it guarded, it whispered warnings to itself. Girls were told to be careful, but be careful is not a strategy. It is a prayer, and prayers do not stop a predator who already knows how to walk among the living without being seen. The fear did not come from the violence alone. It came from how ordinary the beginning of the violence was, how harmless the first step appeared, how easily trust turned into disappearance. The horror was not in the brutality. It was in the familiarity. Women began to look over their shoulders. Men became suspects simply for smiling too kindly. The city learned to distrust gentleness. That is a particular kind of loss. Not just of safety, but of the belief that goodness could be recognized by sight. By the time the pattern became undeniable, it was too late for those who had already trusted. The city was awake now, eyes wide, breath held. But the predator was still walking. This was the moment when São Paulo realized that evil does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it announces itself with opportunity. Sometimes it arrives wearing a smile, the day the hunter became visible. Every predator believes they are invisible until the moment they no longer are. Francisco had moved through São Paulo like a shadow with a pulse, unnoticed, unchallenged, undefined. But shadows only remain shadows when the world is not looking. Once eyes begin to focus, once patterns align, once stories overlap, the outline of the hunter begins to take shape. And the city was finally watching. The breakthrough did not come through dramatic detective work or a sudden confession. It came from the ordinary. A detail remembered, a name repeated, a girl who escaped. It happened quietly, almost anticlimactically, the way real terror usually ends, not with revelation, but with recognition. Someone finally listened when one of the survivors spoke. They believed her. And when her account matched the whispers already stirring through the neighborhoods, the invisible threat gained a face. She described his voice. The way he spoke softly at first, as though building trust was a ritual. The false warmth in his eyes, the practiced tone, the subtle insistence. She told them about the park, about the shift in the air, about the moment the mask fell. Her words gave shape to the fear that had been formless until then. Police sketches were drawn, flyers were circulated, and suddenly the city had an image to place beside the dread. Not a monster, not a creature, just a man, an ordinary man, a man who could stand in line at a bakery, a man who could sit beside you on the bus, a man whose existence destroyed the belief that danger could be recognized by sight. When people saw the sketch, the shock was not in how frightening he looked. It was in how normal he looked. He did not carry the face of evil. He carried the face of someone you would never remember after a single encounter. And that realization made the fear deeper. He was no longer a myth. He was breathing, walking, present. The police began to hunt him, but he was still moving, still smiling, still approaching women with promises of cameras and dreams. The city shifted into a state of suspended breath. Every interaction became suspicion. Every compliment became threat. Every stranger's smile carried weight. It was during this time that he made a mistake, not a dramatic one, not a reckless one, but a small one. He approached someone who recognized the pattern, not just his words, but his cadence, not just his presence, but the quiet calculation beneath it. She walked away. She survived. And she spoke. From there, movement accelerated. Witnesses stepped forward. Familiar stories echoed. The police traced movements, mapped disappearances, connected timelines. The walls around him tightened. But even as the circle closed, he did not run. He did not hide. He did not change his methods. He believed he was still invisible. The day he was identified in public was not cinematic. It was quiet. Someone saw him. Someone recognized him. Someone stopped pretending the danger was too large to confront. A call was made. Officers moved. And the hunter, who had spent so long controlling the narrative, found himself suddenly surrounded by the world he had believed he could manipulate forever. When he was arrested, he did not scream. He did not fight. He did not deny. He simply looked at the officers with the same calm he had shown his victims, as though nothing significant was happening, as though the end of terror was simply another moment in an ordinary day. That expression would haunt the city as much as the crimes themselves. Because when the hunter finally stood in the light, the city learned that evil can be quiet. Evil can be polite. Evil can wait. Evil does not need rage to destroy. Sometimes evil just needs patience. And what São Paulo feared most was not what he had done. It was how easily he had done it. The interrogation and the calm that should not exist. Interrogation rooms are built to expose the truth. The lights are bright, the walls are plain. The air feels still in a way that forces a person to confront themselves. Most people show something when they are placed there. Fear, anger, shame, defensiveness. A crack in the voice, a shifting of hands, a tremor in the breath. The body speaks even when the mouth refuses to. But when Francisco sat down across from the investigators, there was nothing. No trembling, no hesitation, no panic, just calm. A calm so steady that it felt unnatural, a calm that did not match the weight of what he had done. It was the kind of calm someone wears when they have rehearsed the moment long before it arrives. He did not look like a man trying to escape guilt. He looked like a man watching himself from the outside, detached, removed, as though the events he was describing had happened to someone else entirely. The investigators asked questions, not to provoke, not to accuse, but to understand. They wanted to hear his voice, observe the rhythm of his speech, see if emotion lived anywhere in him. He answered clearly, softly, as if recounting errands or directions. He did not search for words. They came easily, too easily. When he described approaching his victims, his tone did not shift. When he described leading them into the park, the stillness in his eyes did not change. When he described the moment trust dissolved into terror, his breathing remained slow, steady. This absence of emotional change is what disturbed the investigators most. Human beings are expected to react when discussing violence. Even those who try to hide it show something. A flicker, a tightening of the jaw, a dryness in the mouth. But he remained composed. It was as though the violent acts were not emotional events, but tasks, actions executed with purpose, then filed away. There was no guilt to suppress. There was no remorse to manage. There was only memory. He did not talk about why. Predators like him rarely do. There is no why that fits inside the structure of ordinary human logic. To ask why is to search for a door in a wall that was never meant to open. He did not offer motive because he did not need one. The acts were the motive, the power, the control. The moment when another person's life became something he could extinguish simply because he decided to. The interrogators described his eyes as quiet, not cold. Quiet. Quiet in a way that suggested absence rather than stillness, as if something essential was missing, empathy perhaps, or the capacity to recognize another human being as equal and real. The calm did not come from peace. It came from emptiness. When asked about the women, he did not speak their names. He spoke their descriptions, their posture, the sound of their voices, the way they reacted when the silence broke. He remembered details that no one should remember. Details that revealed not horror but fascination, observation without feeling. There is a particular terror in seeing a human face carry no regret. The city expected a monster, something wild, disorganized, raging. What it found was a man who could sit, speak, and appear composed. A man who could have continued living among them had he not been caught. A man who, if placed back into the world, could easily put the mask on again. The interrogation revealed something deeper than guilt. It revealed that the monster was not a creature outside humanity. It was a human without the part that makes humanity recognizable. The calm was not innocence. It was absence. And absence is far more terrifying than anger ever could be. The letters, the followers, and the seduction of the dark. When his face appeared on screens and newspapers, the reaction the city expected was universal disgust, outrage, collective horror. And yes, those emotions surfaced. They echoed across São Paulo, across Brazil, across living rooms where families watched evening news broadcasts in tense silence. But something else surfaced too, something far more disturbing than fear or anger: admiration. The first letters arrived quietly, a few at first, then more. Women wrote to him in prison, not victims, not relatives, strangers. Women who said they wanted to understand him. Women who said they believed he had suffered. Women who said they saw something sensitive in him. Women who said they wanted to fix him, save him, heal him. And some did not want to heal him at all. Some adored him. Some confessed attraction. Some claimed they would have gone with him willingly. This is where the story leaves the realm of crime and enters the realm of something far darker: the human fascination with what destroys us, the desire to stand close to the abyss, claiming we will not fall, the instinct to romanticize danger if it speaks softly enough, the illusion that we are different, that we would be the exception, the one he would not harm. There is a psychological pattern to this. It's called hybristophilia, the attraction to those who commit acts of violence and cruelty, the belief that loving the monster grants you power over the monster. That intimacy with danger is a form of control, but control was never in question. He always knew how to take it, and he responded. Not aggressively, not passionately, but with the same calculated gentleness he used before. The same language of attention, the same reflected warmth. Even from behind prison walls, even with the mask exposed, he continued to manipulate. The letters became a new stage, a new performance. The mask was still intact. The audience had simply changed. Some women offered to visit him, some did. Some brought gifts, some spoke about marriage. And the city watched, stunned, horrified, unable to comprehend how anyone could be drawn to the man who had turned trust into a weapon. But the truth is uncomfortable. Monsters do not seduce by showing teeth. They seduce by showing understanding. They mirror desires back to those who want to feel seen. They offer illusion, not threat. And illusion is far more powerful than fear. Society prefers to believe that evil is obvious, that it is marked, loud, visible, that we would know it if we saw it. But the letters proved something no one wanted to admit. Evil can be familiar. It can be polite. It can be attractive. It can be something we think we understand well enough to approach. The darkness does not need to chase us. Sometimes we walk toward it willingly, and when the city learned about the letters, the proposals, the devotion, it faced a truth more frightening than any detail of the crimes. The monster did not build himself. He was built in part by the world that looked at him and did not see him clearly. A world that believes it can fix what it does not comprehend. A world that is drawn to the flame, confident it will not burn. 2028, the year the door might open. Time has a way of eroding even the sharpest terrors. What once filled newspapers and darkened conversations eventually becomes a story people tell only when reminded. The city continues, buildings rise, families change, faces are replaced by new ones in crowds that never stop moving. But while life moved forward outside prison walls, Francisco lived in a world where time did not function the same way. Days blurred, seasons shifted without meaning. And yet, the calendar kept turning. 20 years have passed, and by the logic of law, by the mechanics of the system designed to measure punishment by years rather than by the depth of the wound, there comes a moment when the door may open. That moment has a date, a year, 2028. For many, the idea feels impossible. It is easier to think of him as contained forever, locked away, forgotten. But the law does not operate on emotion. It operates on structure, on time served, on sentences calculated in numbers. And those numbers are almost complete. The thought of his release did not begin as a widespread concern. It began quietly, the way fear always begins. A rumor, a conversation, a report mentioned briefly, then another and another. Awareness began to grow like a slow-moving shadow returning to the city that once tried to forget. What does it mean for a predator to step back into the world? A world willing to believe it has changed, but uncertain if he has. No one can say who he would be now. Time in prison does not guarantee remorse. It does not guarantee transformation. It does not guarantee anything. Rehabilitation is not automatic. And the part of a person that can detach from empathy does not fade simply because walls surrounded them for 2 decades. Lawyers discuss procedure, policymakers debate responsibility, psychologists examine assessments that cannot fully measure the absence of humanity. But the public understands something the reports cannot express. Fear does not need data to be real. Fear remembers, and fear spreads. Some argue that if he served the sentence assigned to him, he should be allowed to return to society. Others argue that some crimes are not measured in years, but in the scars they leave behind in the world. That certain acts should follow the person forever, the way their memory follows the families of those who never came home. But beneath those arguments lies a deeper, quieter question, one that no one wants to say out loud. If he walks out of prison, will the mask return, not as a dramatic transformation, not as a sudden shift, but as a smile, a gentle tone, an offer that sounds like hope? The same pattern, waiting to begin again, because the world outside is full of vulnerability, full of ambition, full of people wanting to be seen, and predators do not have to change to hunt again. The city has grown since the 1990s. The streets are more crowded, the noise is louder, the dreams are larger, the opportunities more abundant, and that abundance brings with it the exact conditions that allowed him to disappear into the population before. He would not need to be the same man. He would only need to be understood in the wrong way, by someone at the wrong moment. 2028 is not just a year. It is a question of memory, a question of safety, a question of whether time heals or merely waits. The city will have to face him again, not in headlines this time, but as a possibility, a door opening slowly. The monster was never alone. Finally, when we speak of him, we speak of one man, one name, one face, one set of crimes. It is easier that way. It makes the horror feel contained, isolated, explainable. A single individual to blame, a single shadow to fear. But nothing of what happened existed in isolation. No monster is born in a vacuum. They are shaped, fed, permitted, overlooked, misunderstood. To say this story is about him alone is to ignore the structure that allowed him to move through a city of millions without being seen for what he was. He did not hunt in darkness. He hunted in daylight, in open spaces, in places where laughter echoed and paths were filled with footprints. The world around him saw him, but it did not see him, because we expect evil to broadcast itself. We expect it to look violent, sound dangerous, feel wrong, but evil does not announce itself. It adapts, it mimics, it learns the shape of what we trust and wears it. He survived for as long as he did because people are trained to be polite, to not make assumptions, to avoid conflict, to give the benefit of the doubt. We teach ourselves to ignore discomfort when we cannot explain it. We tell ourselves that fear without logic is irrational, and he relied on that. The women who followed him were not foolish. They were human. They believed in possibility. They believed in kindness. They believed in the stories they were taught about how opportunity appears. The violence of what happened to them did not begin in the park. It began the moment the world convinced them that distrust was impolite. The families who searched for answers were not slow. They were silenced by a city that moves too fast to look back. A city that lets time swallow tragedy, because time is always pushing forward. The police did not fail because they did not care. They failed because the pattern was invisible until the pattern grew too large to ignore. And when the city finally saw the monster, it still could not understand him. So instead of understanding, it tried to forget. For years, people tried to bury his story. The name faded, the fear dulled, the memory dimmed, life continued. But memory is not erased simply because it is ignored. It waits. It lingers beneath the skin of places, in the shape of a path through a park, in the way a mother tightens her grip on her daughter's hand when walking home, in the instinct to check over your shoulder, even when you know no one is there. This story does not end with his imprisonment. It does not end with the promise of a door opening in 2028. It does not end with fear. It ends with understanding. Understanding that evil is not distant. It does not always live in shadows. It can stand under sunlight and smile. It can speak softly. It can offer hope. The real lesson is not to fear him. The real lesson is to recognize how easy it is to trust the wrong person when we are taught to see danger only in the obvious. How often the world encourages silence where there should be instinct. How vulnerable hope becomes when someone learns how to imitate belonging. The monster in this story has a name, but the conditions that created him do not. The same silence that protected him once can protect someone else now. The same politeness, the same desire to believe a stranger's promise, the same hunger for validation, the same world. So the question is no longer, who was he? The question is, would we recognize him today? Would we recognize someone who speaks gently, someone who smiles kindly, someone who says exactly what we want to hear? Would we see the danger before the mask drops? Or would we follow the voice that feels familiar into the quiet, into the trees, into the part of the world where sound disappears? The true horror is not that a monster once walked among us. The true horror is that he walked there easily, and the world opened its door for him.